Kate Mila, welcome to Irish Granny Helen. This is our Saturday book, and we are on video number 4 of Frame Up, the story of Roscoe Arbuckle by Andy Edmonds. And we just finished the chapter. We're beginning chapter 13. If you haven't, check out the first 3 videos. You really need to know the beginning of the story. Story is getting more difficult now, and before I even start, I want to make it clear, I don't like to be coy, but there are certain words that trigger the algorithm to create problems. I'm on probation, so I'm going to be super cautious. Certain things I'm going to sort of try to describe to you right now, what my code words are, so that you understand what I'm talking about, and I think you will get what I'm talking about. So when I talk about taking things into your own hands, I'm referring to, when people die and it's got to do with personal agency. Crimes having to do of an adult nature with unconsented, unwanted intimacy. And frequently there is aggressive behavior. That would be one of the major issues here. I hope you understand this. When I say somebody couldn't vote yet, you know what I'm saying about their age. So I hope that covers the more sensitive topics here. Quite a bit of discussion of abortion. And as far as I know, that's not off limits to talk about. Don't know for sure. So let's get going here. Chapter 13. So I like this first sentence. The 20s roared through America like an uncontrollable fire. Keep in mind, they were coming out of a pandemic and a world war. They had reason and the end of Prohibition. Gangsters, flappers, bad alcohol. The 20s are called America's 10-year drunk. Prohibition was a knee-jerk reaction of the minority, a vocal reaction to what's called moral decay. But it backfired, and it increased the amount of drinking that was being done. People enjoyed the clandestine nature of it, and there was a lot of partying, a lot of adult behavior, and especially in Hollywood, lots of very, very young, very, very attractive, very, very wealthy people all put in the same area. Young millionaire stars, they flaunted a dissolute lifestyle. This influenced the young of middle America. Everybody dyed their hair blonde. Everybody wanted to be a star. The housewives copied the fashions. The working men copied the machismo. Middle America wanted to keep pace with the stars. And this is Hollywood history. In the 20s, drug usage became a huge nightmare for the city. Cocaine was common. There were stars with $1,000 a week habits. The studios, they had their own pushers. And substance use was often depicted in movies. This is a time before the codes, and this is going to play very, very significantly in the story of what happened to Roscoe. There were not a lot of constraints on what was shown in film. And if you go back to the really early movies, you can see that they were much more free. The subject matter was much more frank. This is long before the days of Lucy and Desi sleeping in double beds. September of 1920 was the first real Hollywood scandal. This is a story that just kills me. This is one of my very favorite silent film stars, Olive Thomas, and there's very little left. Sad to say, the material, like I forget what it's called, but the film that they made black and white movies, silent films on, was highly inflammable. It caught fire at the drop of a hat. And there were tragedies where people burned because the projector caught fire, the film got too hot. They were stored incorrectly because nobody understood. And they kind of melted into big, gigantic, gelatinous messes. And then the value of the historical significance wasn't really understood. And a lot of films were destroyed. Denise told me that in Roscoe Arbuckle's basement, there was this beautiful recording studio, but a lot of it was just the old original basement. It was creepy. But she said there were rows and rows and rows and rows of cans of old film. God, it kind of makes you sick to think about it. Anyway, Olive Thomas was a beautiful young woman. She was a silent film star. She was actually the original flapper. Colleen Moore gets credit for it. Colleen Moore was a comedian in silent films, and she had the very distinctive kind of China doll looking haircut. Now, this is not Louise Brooks. Louise Brooks was an entirely different creature. Colleen Moore was kind of maybe a little gawkier looking and did comedies and is given credit for being the first flapper, but actually Olive Thomas was the first flapper. And she died in a scandal in a Paris hotel. It was assumed that she was responsible, if you know what I mean, because she was having marital problems. She was married to Jack Pickford, the younger brother of Mary Pickford. He was a rake, a ne'er-do-well, a party boy, a bro. And he was over-consuming everything and completely dissolute. The real story is much worse, and I won't talk about it here. I may do a separate video on Olive Thomas just in her honor, and we'll talk more about Jack Pickford. But in the meantime, she died very tragically. She drank poisoned medicine. A lot of questions around that. We'll talk about it. And he died shortly thereafter, and it is rumored that he died of something to do with drugs. Then a guy got arrested on the famous Players Lasky lot. Now, this was the third thing. Olive Thomas was on their list of stars, her husband Jack Pickford, and now a guy got arrested. His name was Captain Spaulding, and he was notorious and popular. And he was arrested for something. I don't know what he was arrested for, but to get out of trouble, he said he would name names because he knew where all the bodies were hidden. And he would rat everybody out unless they dropped charges. So what were they worried about? They were worried about morals charges, because divorce and adultery and premarital sex. Even there were a lot of things that were considered no-nos in those days. And sorry, I've got a thread. Also, they were worried about charges having to do with drugs and bootleg alcohol. So the charges were dropped, hush money was paid, but it was a scandal. People it was one of those secrets everybody knew. And then Charlie Chaplin, in 1918, he got married to his 16-year-old pregnant girlfriend. And of course, the public blamed her. Then The big star, Mary Pickford, divorced Owen Moore, her husband, and married Douglas Fairbanks. And some people even said that she committed bigamy, that she really did not get a real divorce from Owen Moore. Then there's Wallace Reid, and this is such a tragedy. He was enormously handsome. He was a huge, huge heartthrob. And he did a lot of his own stunts, even though he was kind of not happy about it. And he got injured on location. And Zucker wouldn't let him recover, wouldn't let him take time off to recover. He hired a doctor to come to the studio and stay and give him shots of morphine every time he was in pain. And then he made him do the stunts anyway. And in less than a year, he was absolutely destroyed by drug addiction. They had to put him in a sanitarium. And when the news of his addiction got out, his movies were yanked out of theaters, and some theaters refused to book any new movies of his, and his whole entire career was wrecked. His reputation was ruined. Zucker refused to honor his contract, even though it's rumored, that he had this contract with him, and he refused to pay the hospital bill for him. Reid went to a sudden withdrawal, trying to get out of the hospital and get better because Zucker wouldn't pay anymore. And he died in withdrawal. And many, even to this day, they still blame Zucker for that. He's a heartless individual. Since then, since the invention of the movies, as I wrote here, I'm laughing at my stuff. The righteous were always against the movies. They considered them just so immoral. The papers were full of Hollywood sins, and they blamed Hollywood for leading youth astray and for flaunting their money, which was considered poor taste. Churches demanded reform. There were letters written to the studios. There were threats of mass boycotts of movies. And some boycotts did happen on a local level. There was no big organized national boycott, but locally they did happen. Studio executives saw the threat. In 1917, there was a guy called Will Hayes, and he was the Republican Party chairman. In 1920, he became part of what was known as the pro-Harding Ohio gang, guys that were trying to get Harding elected. They had lots of political clout, and he wanted to be president. Will Hayes did. But he didn't have enough support, so he tied his apron strings to people who would get him at least some power and money. In 1921, he was appointed postmaster general. He was the Louis DeJoy of his day. Not anymore. Did you hear he quit? Good riddance. He ushered in big reforms in the postal service. He actually created a dead letter office because people weren't literate enough and letters were illegible, or that what was written could not be read on the envelopes, and they didn't know where things were supposed to go. It became the dead letter office. He was considered virtuous and beyond reproach. And I wrote in the margins, prig. So when you see his picture, he's just something else. He bragged about being 100% American from colonizers of the 1600s. So he was a racist too. He was often accused of taking bribes. He was accused of influence peddling. He had a bad divorce, despite his critique of Hollywood divorces. In 1926, he took bribes in the Teapot Dome scandal, so he was part of that for all his morality. The studio heads got together and they offered him $115,000 a year and prepaid life insurance, unlimited expense account, and a full staff and an office paid by the studios. For what? Well, we're going to see. They wanted to own him so that they could have him under their thumb, and morality rules and regulations would go the way the studios wanted. They wanted to control him the way they controlled everything. Meanwhile, the Los Angeles City Council tried to block him, and they wanted to keep control and ownership of the film industry. The film industry resisted censorship, and they would rather keep the censor under their thumb. And so this was the studios against the LA City Council. The LA City Council, the morally correct people of Los Angeles, had had enough. Meanwhile, Roscoe Arbuckle was on a brutal 6-day-a-week back-to-back filming schedule. He was refining his act, but he was also up all night partying and drinking. He spent furiously. He had a frenzy of bad investments, and that put him into debt with the IRS. He ran up the hundreds of thousands of dollars of bills on credit. So it wasn't that he wasn't paying his bills, but he bought everything on credit with the knowledge that he had these contracts with movies coming up and he would have the money. It was guaranteed. Not quite how it worked out. September of 2021, he bought a $25,000 Pierce Arrow car, 4 times the size of a regular car. It had a bar and it had toilets inside. So Paramount, now this is Lasky, that group has become Paramount. And Famous Players, Lasky, Lowe, yeah. And they were celebrating their 4th year, their 4th annual Paramount Week. And it was a scheme, really, to illustrate the wholesomeness of the industry and introduce the stars to the public as nice, calm citizens. Paramount helped with the cost of movies in theaters, their movies in theaters, so the exhibitors would show their films for this week. Stars went all over the place and made appearances, and tickets were free or really, really cheap. So this was quite the week. It was a publicity campaign. It was to boost box office. It was to increase the prestige of the studios, to improve the image of Hollywood, to stop the constant monitoring and moral censoring. So the movie Gasoline Gus was booked at Grauman's Chinese Theater, but Roscoe refused studio demand that he show up for appearances that Labor Day weekend. Zucker called him an ungrateful child, and he was very outraged and angry. And Roscoe said, I have plans. That's my day off, and I have plans, and I'm going to San Francisco. And Zucker was... you can imagine. He didn't like to hear no. Lasky tried to calm Zucker down. In his autobiography, I Blow My Own Horn, Lasky called Arbuckle conscientious, hardworking, intelligent, always agreeable, and anxious to please. He would invent priceless routines, and he also had a well-developed directorial sense. I don't know of another star who would have submitted to such exorbitant demands as making 3 features in a row on his energy, but Fatty Arbuckle was not one to grumble. There were no temperamental displays in his repertoire. He went through the triple assignment like a whirling dervish in his top form. They were the funniest pictures we ever made. Lasky sent a telegram to Zucker telling him to ease up on Arbuckle, that he deserved his rest and relaxation in San Francisco. But Zucker was relentless in his wrath. Psychopaths hold a grudge. He was not used to being denied anything from his stars, and he told Lasky so. Roscoe was exhausted and looking forward to this weekend up in San Francisco. He booked rooms, reservations at the St. Francis Hotel. Beautiful. So then he spread the word. We're going to have a Labor Day party. Come on up. And it was an open house on one particular day of this party. And most of the people that he asked couldn't go. They had other plans. But then he got a weird call from a former friend. I mentioned this name and told you to remember it. Fred Fischbach, a director, asking, can I come? All of their friends later said that Roscoe was suspicious. This guy wasn't a close friend. Something was wrong because Fischbach was weird on the phone and not close, as I said. Many of Roscoe's friends later believed that Roscoe was lured into a trap. This is setting the stage. And who do you think was behind this? Just keep in mind the circumstances of this weekend. Roscoe was defying the big man. Chapter 14. Roscoe made sure the car was ready for the treacherous 2-lane, sometimes unpaved road past San Luis Obispo. And this is somewhat a little bit north of where I live, kind of central California, southern central California. I lived in Santa Barbara. San Luis Obispo is a little bit north. And the farther north, when I was a child, even farther north you got from Santa Barbara, and this would have been 25, 30 years after Arbuckle. It was still kind of the middle of nowhere. Places like Paso Robles and San Luis Obispo, Buellton, up into Santa Maria. No shade. Santa Barbara was the San Francisco of the South. We always felt ourselves much more sophisticated. Bakersfield, that was another one. Bakersfield was a big joke. Our former Speaker of the House is from Bakersfield, as a matter of fact. Okay, chapter 14. Roscoe made sure he got this car ready for this dirt road. It's quite a drive. He was at the mechanics and he got an acid burn, a second-degree acid burn on his leg. Now, he had trouble with that infection in his leg and it had finally healed. But, you know, those things can sometimes represent themselves when you have a secondary injury. And he had this second-degree acid burn from the mechanics. And he tried to call off this 8-hour drive. It's a brutal drive. And Fischbach, the director who invited himself, was irrational. He was yelling and swearing on the phone, and he demanded that Roscoe not cancel. Roscoe had been given the job of bringing alcohol for the party. Fischbach talked him out of it, and he offered to use his connections in San Francisco to get the alcohol. Roscoe was uncomfortable on the drive. They had to stop part way to go to a store and buy a rubber ring that he could elevate his butt when he sat so that his leg wasn't resting on the burn. They got 3 adjoining rooms in San Francisco. Room 1219, Roscoe and Fischbach, they had a double bed, and Roscoe asked to bring in a twin bed from room 1220. Room 1220 without the bed would be the party room, and 1221 would be shared by Lowell Sherman, slept in by Lowell Sherman. In 219 and 1220, they were separate bedrooms and had separate bathrooms, and 1220 was adjoining bathroom of its own. They got to San Francisco late. They were tired. They ate. They went to bed. A bootlegger came on Saturday that Fischbach had called, and Sunday they went sightseeing. And while they were gone, 3 more people came to the Palace Hotel. They're not staying at the Palace. This is just... Meanwhile, at the Palace Hotel, 3 new people showed up. Al Semenacher, a movie star manager, a friend of his, and a client. The friend was named Maud Delmont. Her full name was Bambina Maud Delmont. She had many aliases. She had an extensive police record. By 1921, she had at least 50 counts of crimes ranging from bigamy to fraud to racketeering to extortion. She was known in Los Angeles and in San Francisco as a professional correspondent. Now, this was a particular person used in court. They'd be hired to provide compromising pictures to use in a divorce or a blackmail. So, for example, let's say you and your wife are getting divorced. You're the husband, you're getting divorced, and you have other reasons for getting divorced, but you want to be able to claim, the wife wants to be able to claim that the husband is unfaithful. So her lawyer would hire this woman, Delmont, to make nice with the husband and get him into bed. And in the middle of the action, a photographer would burst into the room and take photographs. And then he would have to acquiesce to the wife's divorce requests. This is what happens when you no longer have no-fault divorce. She was called a smooth talker, a liar, and she liked to call herself a nightgown model. Now the client, now this is not her real name. Her real name is Rapp. Her real name, Virginia Rapp, R-A-P-P. But she went by Rappe because it sounded more elegant. She was an actress model. There are various biography facts about her that are all kind of sus. That she was the heir of British royalty, that she was the bastard child of a scrub woman and royalty. Nobody knew. Her grandmother later said she was born out of wedlock. Her mother had an affair. Her mother's name was Mabel, and she had an affair with an English nobleman, like a nobility. And it happened while he was visiting the World's Fair in 1894. Mabel had been engaged to the son of a Chicago banker because the English noble promised to marry her, but as soon as she got pregnant, he bailed. So she fled to New York, where she was not known, and Virginia was born. She died when Virginia was 11, and her grandmother raised her in Chicago. She was beautiful and got tons of modeling offers. She had emotional issues. By the time she was 16, she'd had at least 5 abortions. At 17, she was engaged to a 40-year-old sculptor named John Sample. She got pregnant and had a daughter. Sample ran away, and the baby she just put into foster care. She moved to San Francisco to study art. She was the model while people studied her. So you kind of get where this is going. This poor young woman, she didn't have a chance. You know, she obviously had a traumatic childhood and had emotional issues and 5 abortions by the age of 16. Something was going on, right? She also had the reputation, if I remember correctly, of being kind of, I'm just going to say this sounds awfully familiar. I've heard people behave like this who were later diagnosed with bipolar disorder. She would sound very manic and then very depressed. So I don't know. I'm just saying it sounds familiar. She was engaged to a wealthy dress designer, Robert Moscovich, but he got killed in a trolley car accident. She was destitute. She moved to Los Angeles and rented an apartment with her aunt. She met director Harry Lerman from Pathé Studios. He proposed immediately. She was in 2 of his movies, and then she was in movies for other studios, but she was a bit player. But that's how she met Roscoe and Minta. There were rumors and suspicions that she was into the sex business. She was a sex worker in what was used to be called white slavery. That there was something going on involving the studios, like a business in the background, including Keystone. They would lure innocent girls to Hollywood with promises, and then they would put them to work, not making movies. This is very similar to what happens with young women from various places lured into the modeling business in New York, America, and that's not what they find themselves in. Minta said, I couldn't stand that girl. She was sweet enough, naive, but had no morals whatsoever. She'd sleep with any man who asked her. In fact, Mac Sennett had to shut the door twice, had to shut the studio down twice because she was spreading lice and some sort of venereal disease. She was a sad, sad case. In 1918, through her director boyfriend Lehrman's pull, she was named Best Dressed Girl in Pictures. Her photo was used on the cover of several sheet music scores, including Let Me Call You Sweetheart. And there were interviews of her in newspapers. In one newspaper, she said how much she disliked Roscoe Arbuckle, calling him disgusting and crude, vulgar and disrespectful of women. Never, ever, any other time before or after did anyone ever say that about him. They went out of their way to talk about his courtly manners and his shyness and his quiet behavior around women universally. She said he approached her on the Keystone lot and made improper advances. This story was fabricated and most likely trumped up by her boyfriend Lehrman, who despised Roscoe. She later admitted she ran into him at a dance and he showed no ill will and ordered the band to play Let Me Call You Sweetheart in her order. She said it was very charming, and she said she changed her mind about him after that meeting, much to Lehrman's dismay. So Lehrman's got a bone to pick with Roscoe. Adela Rogers St. John was a friend of Roscoe's, and she said, no, this is a little bit more Hollywood gossip here. She'd been living a few blocks from Adela in Hollywood. The day after Fatty had been indicted, the man who did my cleaning came to me and said, I did Virginia Rapé's cleaning. I see where one side says she was a sweet young girl and Mr. Arbuckle dragged her into the bedroom of the hotel. Well, once I went to her house to hang up some cleaning, and the first thing I knew, she'd torn off her dress and was running outdoors saying, save me, a man attacked me. There I was, standing in the kitchen with my hands still full of hangers with her clothes on them. And she was running out hollering I tried to attack her. The neighbors told me whenever she got a few drinks, she did that. I hated to lose a good customer, but I thought it was too dangerous to work for her, and I never went back. So now the plot thickens. Also, she and her boyfriend were good friends of Fishbach's. He was an uneducated boxer, a stuntman, and a property man. And he'd been assigned to Arbuckle as an assistant, and Roscoe taught him fundamentals of directing. This is Lehrman, her boyfriend. No, I'm sorry, it wasn't Lehrman, it's Fishbach. Fishbach got his own comedy unit to direct. He was very capable. So we have Lehrman, who's engaged to her and hates Roscoe, is a director. And Fishbach, also a director, good friends with Lehrman, but owes everything he knows about directing to Roscoe. In 1919, Roscoe and Fishbach had a falling out. And after that, they weren't too close. There was animosity. Fishbach has a friend of Lerman, and he knew Rapp. Rappe was in A Twilight Baby, a movie of Lerman's. And then they broke up, and she was left alone and pregnant, and he went to New York. So she's reliving her mother's life in a lot of ways. There's no information about why these three people, Semnacher, Delmont, the con artist, and Rappe, were all in San Francisco. But there's certainly suspicions and rumors from her friends. She went up to San Francisco to have an abortion. She told Semnacher, and he advised her, don't do it in LA. Get out of town. Do it up north. Go to San Francisco. He was going to San Francisco because he had a divorce hearing, and he needed Delmont to get evidence of his wife's adultery. So that's why she was going. And Delmont was going to be like, you know, the witness. And the hearing got canceled after the news of what happened in the hotel room and the scandal got out. But in the meantime, that was his purpose for going, and he took Rappe with him because she had business, medical business, and Delmont was up to her old con artist tricks. So Saturday, September 3rd, Delmont had introduced Virginia to Semnacher at his home in Hollywood, and they headed north. They had hotel rooms at the Palace. Roscoe and his company were at the St. Francis, and they had visitors, but they had a very quiet weekend. The whole weekend, people dropped by, but in ones and twos, it wasn't a big deal. They were doing sightseeing until Monday, September 5th, 2021. No, that's right. 1921. I wonder how often I've said 2021 doing this video. That's really funny. It's been over 100 years. Fishbach met a friend. Honest to God, a real nightgown salesman. And then, you know, Delmont's there. She's a nightgown model. Perfect combination. So he had a friend, a nightgown salesman called Ira Fortiers, and they had lunch at the St. Francis. Fishbach was up in Roscoe's room for the party early, and he invited Fortius to go with him. And they found Roscoe and Semnacher and Fishbach up in the room, and Fishbach was in pajamas. There were 15 to 20 people in and out through the day, including Delmont, Rappe, Semnacher, and two other actresses, Zey Previn, and Alice Blake, who will play an important role later. Roscoe told two slightly different stories of what happened, but in both of them, Delmont, Rappe, and Semnacher were invited by Fishbach, even when Roscoe said no. So Fishbach invited himself. Roscoe didn't really want him to be there. He thought he was weird. He didn't want him there, but he couldn't figure out how to get rid of him. It was like a barnacle. When he showed up, he had called and asked Roscoe, I've got these friends came to town. I'm going to bring them. And Roscoe said no. He knew Delmont. He knew who she was, and he knew she was a troublemaker. He knew what Rappe's reputation was, and he told Fishbach, they're trouble. Stay away from them. Don't bring them near me. He was really afraid that the management of the hotel would kick them all out for running a prostitution ring or having an orgy or something. He was afraid of those allegations. The party was in full swing. There was food and bootleg booze and dancing and drugs. Now, Roscoe hadn't gotten dressed yet because he still had this burn on his leg. So he had a robe on over his more casual clothes. Fishbach took Roscoe's car, which this is the strangest story. If you've been to San Francisco, you know that down in that area, San Francisco, Carmel, Monterey, there are a lot of harbor seals. There are a lot of walruses. And at the time, there were even more. When I was a kid, it was incredible how many. Fishbach wanted to go get one to take it back to make a movie with it. He took Roscoe's car to go look at seals for his movie. Can't imagine somebody doing something like that, but anyway, Roscoe said, I don't want you to leave, but if you're going to insist on leaving, come back soon. I need my car. So Fishback left alone. And it seemed like he was in a big hurry. The main players were now in place. A nightgown salesman with samples, a model who was also a professional correspondent, this would be Delmont, a known prostitute, a bootleg liquor, allegedly drugs, all ordered to the room by Fred Fishbach, who then took off, leaving Roscoe and Lowell Sherman with a time bomb on their hands. So there are so many versions of what happened. I'm going to try to go through this. I didn't even bother writing it down in synopsized form because there's just so much. I figured I'd be better quickly looking at it and trying to put it into words quickly. So bear with me while I kind of pick through this. The rooms were hot. Delmont put on a pair of pajamas and drank somewhere between 15 and 20 scotches. She and Sherman disappeared into his room. Virginia drank orange blossoms, gin and orange, until she was extremely drunk. Once drunk, she started having convulsions and hysterics and ran through the rooms, ripping off her clothes. So we're talking real instability here. She started pounding on the door of the bathroom that Delmont had now gone into, screaming for them to let her in. And then she ran in and then ran into Roscoe's bathroom. Unaware that Virginia was in the bathroom, Roscoe went in there to get dressed, and when he tried to open the door, he found the door was shut by something against it. He pushed several times, finally got in enough to get through, and what was blocking the door were her feet. She was kneeling over the toilet vomiting, and she was screaming in pain, so he helped her up and set her down on top of the seat, and she calmed down, and he helped her to go lie in the bed, and he went and got dressed, and after he was dressed, he went and checked on her and found her lying on the floor at the side of the bed. He put her back on the bed. She vomited again and was writhing in pain. He went to get a bucket of ice. Sherman and only less than 10 minutes had gone by since he'd initially discovered her in the bathroom throwing up. Sherman and Delmont had now come in to join the party, and they were disgusted with Virginia's hysterics. And everyone was drunk, and people were arguing with each other, and it was kind of a mess. Roscoe took the ice into the bedroom to calm Rapé down, he said, and to determine whether or not she was hysterical. Buster Keaton had told him you could always tell whether a woman was faking a fainting spell or hysterics by putting a piece of ice on their leg, and it would shock them out of it. So he did that, thinking it would cool her fever. She had a bad fever now, so the plot thickens. Delmont came in. Now, mind you, she'd had close to 20 scotches. She came in and they all kind of talked to each other and decided, oh, this girl, she's drunk. And Virginia started tearing at her clothes and screaming she was hurt and dying. This is when the two other stars, the young women Zay and Alice, came in. Roscoe was working under the assumption that this girl was drunk. And he said, get her out of here. She's making too much noise. Fishbach came in and joked about Roscoe having fun despite his sore leg. And Roscoe didn't think it was very funny. And he told this is not the time or the place to be joking like that. Virginia was sort of semi-conscious. Maud Delmont ordered someone to fill the bathtub with cold water to bring down her fever. She woke up and she was rambling and not making a lot of sense. She started screaming, "Stay away from me. I don't want you near me." And then some people, like Delmont, said that she heard Virginia say, "What did he do to me? Roscoe did this to me." And the prosecution really drilled down on that. But most of the people there said she was raving and rambling and ranting and not making a lot of sense. But we're going to find out that maybe she did say that, but it was misunderstood what she meant. Anyway, the cold water seemed to calm her down, and they took her into the other room to keep an eye on her. Delmont went with them, and she passed out on the bed. So Roscoe called the hotel manager and the hotel doctor. The hotel doctor was a Dr. Arthur Beardsley, but he was unavailable, so another doctor was found. And he just kind of gave her a quick look over and said, "Oh, she's just had too much to drink. Let her sleep it off." Then the hotel detective came in and he looked in on her and said, "Let her sleep it off." With her out of the way, the party went on. There was all kinds of nonsense and wild dancing about. Arbuckle did not want like a bootleg-induced orgy going on in his room. He was not very happy about this at all. He didn't want most of these people there to begin with. He did leave the party. He went for a drive with his friend May Taub after Fischbach returned his car. Then he dropped her off and went back down to a pier to get his car shipped to Los Angeles on board a boat. Because of his sore leg, he decided he wasn't going to drive back. He'd take a boat. Maybe he'd planned on taking the train. He returned moments before Dr. Beardsley arrived, about 7 o'clock. Virginia woke up screaming again. At this point, the doctor was there. He injected her with morphine, and he told Delmont, "I just gave her morphine. She's in pain. What happened here? What's wrong with this girl?" And at that point, Delmont told the doctor a big, gigantic lie. So now we're on chapter 15. The next morning, Virginia was screaming in pain, and the doctor was called and gave her more morphine. This is just unbelievable. 4 hours later, Dr. Beardsley was called again, and he was told that Virginia had not urinated since vomiting 15 hours earlier, and he catheterized her in the hotel room, got 5 ounces of urine with old blood, and she had a history of bladder trouble. But at this point, he recognized there was something wrong with her bladder, and the prosecution later claimed that Roscoe had caused her an injury by jumping on her. Dr. Beardsley checked her 4 times that day. He finally decided maybe she's not just drunk, but he didn't move her to the hospital. Said she just needs to rest and recover. But then she began to deteriorate. Delmont called another doctor, Dr. Rumwell. Now, this guy was a prominent San Francisco guy. He specialized in maternity and postnatal care. And Delmont seemed to have a friendship with him, to know him very well. And keep that in mind. She put him in charge of Virginia. He examined Rape. She was conscious and sore and had no memory of her illness. There was no evidence of any kind of violence or attack, no marks or bruises. This was all noted by the doctor. She slept. The doctor left. He hired 2 nurses to come in. Jean Jameson was one of them, to be by her bedside. She said later she saw no evidence of physical violence. She thought it was bootleg alcohol that was making her sick. Rape told her that she had genital soreness and bleeding because of excessive involvement with her fiance. She'd had it for 6 weeks. Jameson assumed, I mean, it's a big assumption. She just assumed she has venereal disease. It's contagious and it's not treatable. So I'll put that in my little book. Jameson left Tuesday thinking she was no longer needed. Tuesday, Arbuckle and Fishbach and Sherman checked out. Arbuckle paid all the bills, including for Rape. And they were told by the doctors, so all's well, she's fine, go on home. They had no idea that this plot had been hatched. Roscoe noticed that Fishbach was very edgy and irritable and talked a lot about Virginia's illness on the way home. Roscoe said, well, she got a hold of some bad alcohol. Then he asked Fishbach, why was he so worried? He said, is she your girlfriend? Are you involved with her? And Fishbach went silent. On the trip home, they met an acquaintance, Irvin Weinberg, and he introduced Roscoe to Doris Dean. Doris Dean's significant. She later became Roscoe's second wife. She remembered him that day as calm, friendly, open, chatty, happy. They were very taken with each other. Dean felt that Roscoe was too innocent of a person to hide anything so terrible as what he was later charged of. This was like less than a full day after. And to be so open and casual and friendly in light of what would have been, this terrible event. The next day, he went back to work and he casually mentioned the party and Rape to Schenk. Schenk told the details of what Roscoe told him. Roscoe told me that Rape and Delmont were at the party, and I laughed. I remember telling them, I'm surprised anyone stayed with those two there. Having Virginia Rape at a party was a sure ticket for a quick wrap-up. She was well known everywhere. Her reputation was bad, to say the least. And this is not victim shaming. This young woman had left a trail of disasters behind her. When Roscoe, this is Schenk talking. When Roscoe told me that Freddie Fishbach was the one who invited them, I thought to myself, that's odd. I thought Freddie would have known better. I asked Freddie about it a while later. He refused to say anything. There was something very strange about the whole affair. I had a feeling something was wrong with the guest list at the party. Roscoe was very casual about the party, and he certainly would have been uneasy talking about Rape if he had anything to hide, but he was free and open to friends who later related details in newspaper interviews. He even mentioned the bootleg liquor, but told only close friends it was Fishbach who ordered it. When he mentioned Fishbach's involvement, it was not with the intention of tattling, but simply relating the story to those close enough to know that bootleggers were part of daily life among the wealthy movie crowd. In San Francisco, Virginia got worse. She became incoherent. The new nurse, Victoria Cumberland, knew that something was very wrong. She was incoherent from the time that Roscoe carried her into the bedroom after she vomited in the bathroom. She actually she was incoherent, but she became able to ask a question. She asked the nurse if she knew a good abortionist in San Francisco, and she was hemorrhaging. The nurse quit because Delmont wouldn't call the doctor. And later, she complained about the procedures that weren't followed, that should have been followed. She was a nurse. She was a good nurse, and she was appalled. The next day, Dr. Rumwell came and diagnosed possible gonorrhea and possible kidney infection. Rapé was taken to Wakefield Sanitarium. Her diagnosis was peritonitis because of a ruptured bladder, and she was so sick they could not even do surgery for her. Rumwell gave her opium and antibiotics, and by midnight it was too late. She died the next day. Rupture of the bladder was on the postmortem death certificate, but it wasn't signed by any of the doctors that had seen her. Her bladder, uterus, rectum, fallopian tubes, ovaries were all put in jars and secretly destroyed. The death certificate lacked the most basic biological information. When the two doctors at the Wakefield Sanatorium were getting ready to do the autopsy, Michael Brown, the San Francisco Homicide Department's deputy coroner, got a weird phone call. One woman called to ask him about the autopsy, and he said, "What autopsy? What are you talking about?" Now, the law is he should have known. He was the deputy coroner for the police. She muffled the phone, was obviously talking to another woman in the background, and then hung up. Coroner Brown called back, got the same woman. She was alarmed. She denied ever calling him, said she knew nothing about what he was talking about. What autopsy? So Brown went to the sanatorium. He later testified at the inquest. He got blocked by the staff at Wakefield. He was given no information about an autopsy. He was told he'd have to talk to the doctors. He waited for 2 hours, and he caught the doctors in the hall carrying obvious autopsy specimens. He knew the coroner had not been notified about this autopsy, and he told them, "You did an illegal autopsy. You're required by law to contact the coroner before any autopsy." Dr. Rumwell was casual. His attitude was that he was one of the doctors. He said, "I never took care of her. I was just called in to do the autopsy. I don't know anything about it. Take it up with her doctor." Brown inspected the organs and the body, and he diagnosed a ruptured bladder and subsequent peritonitis, but he was suspicious because of the phone call and of the doctor's attitude. He tried to request an investigation. Meanwhile, Dr. Rumwell destroyed her organs, all evidence that could clear Roscoe and that would have implicated Rumwell in her death. There are San Francisco Department of Health files that still exist. They all trail back to Dr. Rumwell. He was associated with Wakefield. He was a staff physician. It was known as an illegal abortion clinic for the wealthy and prominent of San Francisco. His reputation in Hollywood was abortionist to the stars for $1,000 or more. Virginia had said at Roscoe's party she needed money for abortion, and people thought that she meant to get one. But gossip was that she just had one and she needed to pay for it. That's why she needed the money. The common belief was that Delmont went with Virginia to the sanitarium for an abortion, like Labor Day weekend before the party, and that Rumwell did it. And he saw that she had scars from earlier abortions, and he saw that she had gonorrhea, but he did it anyway. And he took no special precautions. And so her internal organs were compromised by this long-term infection she already had. And this is why Delmont fired Dr. Beardsley and called Rumwell, because he knew what was up, because he'd done it. The doctor didn't go to visit Virginia once back at the clinic. It also explains the rushed autopsy, Rumwell's denial that he was Virginia's doctor, and why he destroyed the evidence. Cover-up. County records show that he was investigated as an abortionist, and the reports on the investigation were lost. Rumwell tried to take himself out of the case and remove his name associated with the case. And Delmont, because the quintessential con artist, had dollar signs in her eyes, and she contacted the press. And she contacted the San Francisco Police Department, and she swore out a complaint against Roscoe, accusing him of doing the injury to Rabbi. So I'm going to end here. It's the end of that chapter. And now the stage has been set. He's been inadvertently given a long history of suspected violent behavior and poor treatment of women, and it wasn't true. None of it was true. Going to orgies, he didn't do that. So that's the end of video 4. And then we'll get to the trials. Yes, plural. I get angry about this story because it was such an injustice. And if you listened to video 1, you heard the story of his childhood. Such a decent person, had incredibly difficult upbringing and experience as a young person. It seems so unfair. Okay, that's all. I hope you all have a nice weekend, and thank you very much for watching. I am still in the business of doing private readings, and I will also happily do Grand Tableau if you're interested in that. And I take questions for Ask Your Irish Granny on Substack. Nobody's had any problems. I'm not very good at advertising myself, so spread the word and consider becoming a member. It's only 99 cents. And in the meantime, thanks very much for watching this, and slán go fóill, sláinte.